I like watching Jim Cramer and all these CNBC people freak out about this is the greatest trick that corporatists, neoliberals, however you want to refer to them, or even like the no labels people or the so-called centrists. The greatest trick they've ever played on our society is that they don't have an ideology. That when they propose an interpretation of antitrust, it is completely free of ideological basis. It's just science or natural. Here is CNBC proving that point. Remember, antitrust in this country, from Teddy Roosevelt, basically the turn of the century, I should say the 20th century, until 1980, antitrust was one way in this country. And then in 1980, the Borkian school of antitrust took hold in the Reagan administration. And for the past 40 years, it's been another way. You would not know that if you listened to CNBC.
Win by Jonathan Cantor. All right. No. Hey, when you dismiss me?
Yeah, I'm dismissing.
Always comes back to the publishing, right? You just said this many times.
I'm not saying that he's not a very formidable guy, and I'm sure he has a lot of great lawyers, but you know who else does? Alphabet. And you know who else has unlimited money? Alphabet.
Well, then Jamie Gorelick, in that first go-round, she now represents Amazon. Right, no, she's on the board. No, here's what I'm going to say uniquely. Let me go back. Legally, they're good. I mean, they're not Musk. We haven't even touched yet on the stand.
Don't worry.
I'm just saying that this is the most ideological antitrust department I have seen since, and you'll get this, Standard Oil and Teddy Roosevelt. They want to make law. I don't know if you read the Harvard Law Review piece by our distinguished FTC person, but what it says, the head of it is that all combinations are bad. They're all bad. They're bad for everyone.
Right.
And they're really particularly good for rich people and bad for everybody else. That is their ideology. David, that's an ideology. I remember I took Marx and Engels. Remember when Engels said that people are like a sack of potatoes? Actually, he was speaking of the peasantry.
Understood. And under antitrust law, it may be very difficult for them to prove a case. That said, there are no shortage.
I don't think Engels' conclusion was the people are a sack of potatoes. I think that's a little bit of a misreading of the lumpen proletariat thing.
But put aside that his misreading of Marx Engels. The point is that there have been no laws that have been changed. There were no laws that were changed in terms of antitrust when Bork came in. There's been no laws. The laws are the same on the book since that same era that he's talking about. The ideologues came in and changed 80 years of antitrust laws, really all of the modern laws dealing with corporations and trusts in this country. And by modern, I mean, in the 20th century, since the industrial, or the lead up to the Industrial Revolution. All of those laws were reinterpreted in 1982 under the Reagan administration. That was the big change. To say that they're coming in and making new laws, no, that's the whole point. They're using exactly the laws that have been on the books for a century, essentially. They are now just going back to the original interpretation of those laws that existed and was law of the land for 80 years, incidentally, also through the greatest sort of economic growth period that this country has enjoyed. And in terms of spread to the most amount of people with the lowest amount of income inequality in this country during the so-called Great Compression, which is, the 40s into the 50s into the 60s, into the 70s, arguably. And so they frame this as if there's a whole bunch of radicals that have come in there, as opposed to people who are simply going back to the pre-Borkian version of interpreting antitrust laws. And they are afraid because they don't want a government that is going to come in and curb the essentially the externalizing of costs to society of these big mergers. That's what's going on here. And they are sounding the alarm. They're freaking out about it. And they want to make it like there's a bunch of freako radical hippie dippies, and that combine them to Teddy Roosevelt is sort of funny. Like Teddy Roosevelt is not a Marxist.
No.
Be clear. This is just simply reforming capitalism.
Yeah.
Now, I happen to think that it's also important, if you want to go further than reforming capitalism, to weaken the most powerful corporate players in our society, to diminish wealth inequality. Because if you look at where this country was going after those years of the Great Compression, you were getting more pushback. You were getting things like civil rights. You were getting people who were arguing for, less war. You were getting people who were basically saying, once there was that sort of like broad-based, to the extent that there could be, because we also had a lot of racism at that time, but broad-based economic prosperity, again, this is all relatively speaking, as opposed to massive wealth inequality, then people start asking for more rights.
Yeah.
And more things of their government. And that's what they don't want.
CNBC crowd doesn't want that. Just to back up your point about how this is just tweaking capitalism, like some of the mergers or combinations, as Cramer refers to them there, that Biden has blocked with Lena Khan, have been hospital mergers. He's blocked a few hospital mergers because he wants to promote more economic competition in the healthcare marketplace. Like, that's the radical that Cramer is referring to and saying that that's Marx and Engels.